400 years had passed since Joseph saved Egypt, and now his descendants were its slaves. They built Pharaoh's cities with bare hands and broken backs under a sun that never let up. Day after day, year after year, generation after generation. Egypt didn't just take their labor, it took their names, their dignity, their sense that anyone anywhere could see them. And for 400 years, the sky said nothing back. Pharaoh had decided there were too many Israelites. His solution was simple and brutal. Every baby boy born to them would be thrown into the Nile. One mother looked at her son and made a different decision. She wove a basket from river reeds, sealed it with tar, and placed him inside. Then she carried him to the water and let go. Pharaoh's own daughter pulled him out. She named him Moses, meaning drawn from the water. The boy the empire tried to drown would be the one who drowned its army. Moses had once lived in the palace, a prince with every advantage Egypt could offer. Then he killed a man, ran for his life, and disappeared into the desert. 40 years passed, long enough for a person to forget who they used to be, long enough to believe the story was over. He became a shepherd, a foreigner, a man tending someone else's flock on the far side of nowhere. And then, on an ordinary afternoon, the impossible happened. A bush caught fire and refused to burn down. Flames roared through every branch, every leaf, but nothing was consumed. Moses turned aside to look, and the moment he did, a voice came out of the fire. It didn't ask, it commanded. "Take off your sandals, this ground is holy." Moses hid his face. The fire didn't dim. The voice didn't soften. "Go back to Egypt, face Pharaoh, bring my people out." Moses gave every reason he could think of: fear, inadequacy, the certainty that he was the wrong man for the job. The voice answered each one, not with comfort, but with authority. And in the end, Moses did the only thing a person can do when the living God speaks from a fire that will not die. He went. Moses walked back into the empire he had fled, the most powerful nation on earth, carrying nothing but a wooden staff and a command from a fire that would not die. The throne room was built by the very people Moses was asking to free. Columns carved by their hands, gold mined from their labor, a throne raised on the backs of generations. Pharaoh sat on it like a man who believed the world existed to obey him. Moses stood before him, a shepherd in desert clothes, dust still on his feet from the journey. "Let my people go," he said. Pharaoh's answer wasn't just no, it was punishment. If the slaves had time to think about freedom, then they clearly had time to work harder. No more straw for the bricks. Make the same quota anyway. The people blamed Moses. Moses wasn't sure he'd heard God correctly, but the confrontation wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. Pharaoh said no. So God answered in a language Egypt couldn't ignore. The plagues weren't random. They were precise. Each one aimed at something Egypt trusted, worshipped, or believed it controlled. One by one, the pillars of the empire cracked. The Nile turned to blood, the river that fed their fields, their cities, their gods. Ra, the sun god, was powerless to stop it. Frogs swarmed the streets, the homes, the beds, life overflowing into chaos. Gnats and flies followed, turning breath itself into misery. Livestock died, boils broke out, hail shattered the sky, locusts erased the land in a single afternoon. Then came darkness. Not night, not shadow, but a physical weight pressing down on Egypt. The sun rose, but no one saw it. Ra God was gone. Each time Pharaoh begged for relief, each time when the pressure lifted, he hardened again, until the night he couldn't. God didn't give the Israelites a weapon. He gave them instructions. A lamb without defect, killed at twilight, its blood painted on the door frame with a branch of hyssop. Eat the meal dressed to leave, sandals on, staff ready, bags packed. Stay inside, wait. The shadow that moved through Egypt that night wasn't a storm or a creature. It didn't roar or strike. It simply passed, entering every house unmarked by blood, passing over every house that obeyed. Inside the marked homes, families sat in silence, listening to a city hold its breath. Outside, Egypt broke. By dawn, Pharaoh's own son was dead, and the man who had called himself a god finally understood he wasn't one. He didn't negotiate, he didn't threaten, he didn't delay. He told them to go, all of them. Now, for the first time in 400 years, Israel wasn't just allowed to leave. Egypt begged them to. Pharaoh called for Moses in the middle of the night, not commanding, not negotiating, but begging. Get out, take your people, take your animals, go, now. 2 million people walked out of Egypt before the sun came up. They carried everything they could hold. The Egyptians gave them gold and silver just to speed the departure. 400 years of unpaid wages handed over in a night. And ahead of them in the darkness, a pillar of fire appeared in the sky to lead the way. 600 chariots. That was Pharaoh's answer to his own grief. Regret and rage combined into an army thundering across the desert to bring them back. The Israelites reached the water and realized they were trapped. The sea was ahead of them, the Egyptian army behind. And the people turned on Moses immediately. We told you this would happen. We were better off as slaves. Fear does that. It makes the past look safe and the future look impossible. Moses raised his staff. The wind hit the water, and a road opened through the deep. The Israelites made it across. The Egyptian army charged straight into the corridor after them. The chariot wheels started sinking into the seabed. The horses panicked. The officers shouted that God was fighting for Israel and they should retreat. Too late. Moses stretched his hand over the sea. The walls fell. 3 days into the desert, the complaining started. Hunger does that. The desert offered nothing, and fear began doing its math. At least in Egypt there was food. Slavery had bread. Freedom had sand. This was the point of the wilderness. To expose the question every freed person eventually faces. Can you trust God when you cannot control anything around you? Every morning for 40 years, the answer waited for them on the ground. A fine white layer covering the desert floor like frost. It tasted like honey wafers. They called it manna. Take what you need. Don't store it. Come back tomorrow. Freedom wasn't just escape. It was learning to depend on God one day at a time. 3 months after leaving Egypt, they reached the mountain where Moses had first heard the voice in the burning bush. God told them to prepare. 3 days from now, he would descend on this mountain. Don't touch it. Don't go near it. Anyone who crosses the boundary dies. On the 3rd morning, the sky over Sinai turned black. Thunder rolled across the peaks. Lightning split the clouds. A sound like a trumpet rose and kept rising, louder, sharper, unbearable, until the people begged for it to stop. Moses walked straight into the fire and stayed there for 40 days. Moses was gone 40 days. No contact, no update, no sign he was coming back. The anxiety built into a decision. Maybe he's dead. Maybe God abandoned us here. We need something we can see. Aaron, Moses' brother, the one left in charge, collected their gold earrings and melted them into a calf. The people celebrated. They called it God. Moses came down the mountain carrying the law that had just been written. He could hear the noise from the top. And when he saw what was happening at the bottom, the tablets hit the ground. After the golden calf, Moses went back up the mountain, and when he came down the second time, he carried more than tablets. God had given him a blueprint for something the world had never seen, a sanctuary that could move, a dwelling place that could travel with the people, a structure for the divine presence to walk with them through the wilderness. The Israelites brought everything they had: gold, silver, fabric, wood. More than enough. The craftsmen worked with a kind of urgency, as if they understood what this meant. And when it was finished, the cloud that had led them out of Egypt descended from the sky and moved inside. They left Egypt as slaves. They arrived at Sinai as something else, a people with a law, a covenant, a structure, and a God who had walked with them through 40 years of wilderness. But freedom didn't begin the day they stepped out of Egypt. It had to be built, choice by choice, trust by trust, failure by failure. The wilderness was never the punishment. It was the training ground, the place where slavery is unlearned one day at a time. And that lesson didn't end at Sinai. If you've ever stood at a threshold afraid to move forward, if you've ever looked back at something familiar, even when familiar meant chains, you already understand what Exodus is about.